All right. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the Self-Care Forum podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Cedric Batchetu. Today we have joining us is Dr. Laura Ricciardi. She is a certified Whole30 coach, a research psychologist, a wife, and a new mother. You can usually find her at the gym, setting up her new home, or cooking. She loves cooking. This podcast, the Self-Care Forum, essentially we bring you knowledge that will empower you to address the root causes of your diseases. Certainly we will bring guest speakers, health professionals with interesting perspectives. Our goal is to interest you in the care of the human frame, in diet and nutrition, and in the root cause and the prevention of your disease. So we have with us Dr. Laura Ricciardi. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. That was great.
Yeah. I actually know your husband, Adam. So we know each other outside of this forum actually. But yeah, Dr. Laura, you have the floor. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and certainly how you got into wellness and Whole30.
Great. So, as you mentioned, I am wife to Adam. We've been married for just about 2 years, and a mother to Isla, my baby girl. She's our baby girl. She's 10 months old today. And I worked as a research psychologist up until Isla was born, and now I stay with her full time, which is a wonderful blessing. And I'm still working as a Whole30 coach and as a beauty counter consultant. And I'm originally from Massachusetts. I moved to New York to pursue my PhD. I went to Fordham and I got my doctorate in applied developmental psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of moved from there into more educational research. And I became a Whole30 certified coach in April 2019, so a little over 2 years.
Okay.
I found the Whole30, I want to say it was 2015. It was kind of the very early days of Whole30. And I kind of took it on as like a little bit of a dietary challenge, partially because I had digestive issues that I just had never been able to get to the root of. And partially just because I loved all these different kinds of like challenges. So I liked the idea of a 30-day kind of challenge. And I never expected it to affect my relationship with food, to help me see food as fuel and to have more control over my diet and my food. But it absolutely has. Like it's really changed my relationship with food so much for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've done it several times. And I started kind of helping friends and family do it, and that kind of led me into the coaching. So I got my coaching certification a couple of years ago, and since then I've led, I think, 5 or 6 Whole30 groups and a whole bunch of individuals through the Whole30.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, and we talked about earlier, I just moved up to Pleasant Valley, New York. We were living in Mount Vernon I was living there for the past few years. So we're in our new home settling in, and you mentioned also I love to cook, and I've created some recipes online on my blog. I like to write blog posts and exercise.
All right. Congratulations on the marriage and the child. That's all good news. So for those of us in the audience who may not know what exactly Whole30 is, because I'll be honest with you, I recently learned about it. I think it may have come through you, and then I did some digging of my own, and I found out it's a bit of it's essentially an elimination diet. Am I correct? Yeah. So in your own words, how would you define Whole30? I know you said you had some digestive issues and you found the challenge something that ultimately benefited you and your digestive issues, but how would you define Whole30? What are some advantages that, not just for yourself, but what are some advantages compared to maybe some of the other trends or diets that are out there?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the Whole30 is an elimination diet. So it is not a weight loss diet. So that's already a big part of what differentiates it from other diets. So in an elimination diet, you eliminate certain foods from your diet for a specific period of time, and then you reintroduce them systematically one by one to see how they affect your body. So basically you get them completely out of your body and then try them out one at a time. And you can see how they affect you specifically because, your body is different from everybody else's body. So it provides a lot of valuable information about food sensitivities. It's considered the gold standard for testing for food sensitivities. So what else differentiates it from other diets would be the food freedom piece, which I know that we'll talk about more, but basically rather than kind of finishing a 30-day diet or 90-day diet or whatever, and then kind of just going back to what you were doing before, it helps you create a plan for your long-term diet that's very specific to you. So I'll explain each phase in a little bit more detail. So during the elimination portion, you eliminate these food groups from your diet. No dairy, no sweeteners, which includes like honey, stevia, sugar, no alcohol, no legumes, certain additives like MSG and sulfites that are in a lot of processed foods. See if I'm leaving, no grains, including corn, and no legumes, which includes peanuts and beans and other legumes that are a little more obvious. So you eliminate these foods for 30 days. And during these 30 days, you can eat lots of fresh foods, lots of meat, fish, vegetables, and fruits. That's the crux of your diet is like a very whole foods diet.
Mm-hmm.
And drink a lot of water.
And drink a lot of water, yes.
And so then at the...
That's awesome. Yes. No, continue, please.
Yeah. So then at the end of the 30 days, we have the reintroduction phase. And so that's at minimum 10 days. It can carry on much longer if you want to do something a little more specific or just take your time with it. So during this phase, on the first day of your reintroduction, you would eat, typically it's legumes. It's whatever food you're least likely to have an issue with based on what you know about yourself. So most people start with legumes and they eat legumes throughout the day. So it's basically like Whole30 foods plus legumes. So you're isolating the legumes. You're eating only the legumes. And then you go back to Whole30 for a couple of days and see how your body reacts, because sometimes it can take a day or two for you to realize that like your skin broke out and you won't know what to attribute it to.
Right.
Wait enough time. Wait at least 2 days. If you get like a real reaction, then you would want to wait longer, so that you can recover from it before you reintroduce the next thing. So then you move on to typically gluten-free grains. Most people, have less of a problem with that than with gluten-containing grains. You reintroduce that throughout the day, and then same thing, go back to Whole30 for at least 2 days, see what happens, pay attention to your body, and then on to the next. And so you typically reintroduce the Whole30, the basic reintroduction is legumes, and then gluten-free grains, and then dairy, and then gluten. And then I'll oftentimes work with people to kind of like extend that if they want to. Sometimes people want to break it up more, like just introducing beans and then introducing like chickpeas or something more specific. But that's kind of the basic reintroduction. Mm-hmm. And so then the third step is food freedom. And so food freedom is essentially when you are in control of your food instead of food controlling you. And food controlling you can be like you binge eat, you can't stop eating once you start, or it can even be like you obsessively count calories or macros or track your weight, weigh yourself. That's another one on the Whole30, no weighing yourself, no taking body measurements. It's 30 days focused just on your health and not on like your body composition. And you can feel, if things are changing, but again, it's not a weight loss diet. And the goal is really to start to kind of shift mindset away from focusing on eating a certain way for your weight and more toward eating a certain way for your health and just how you feel, your well-being. Mm-hmm. So like I was saying, in food freedom, Now you take what you've learned from the reintroduction and you apply it to your long-term diet. So for example, sometimes people find that dairy did not work for them and they didn't even realize that it was making them like foggy, or it was causing this breakout on their back, or like so many different issues. So then they can decide, I know that dairy does this specifically to my body. So is dairy something that I can have whenever I want? Is it something that I can have every now and then, just knowing that, you know, it might make me break out, but I'll just have it just this one time and then, you know, recover and not eat it all the time? Or is it something that's never worth it for me, that like I should just kind of leave out of my diet? So like for me, legumes, like they don't totally agree with me. Rice doesn't totally agree with me. I'll eat it every now and then, but I'm not going to eat it every day because I just won't feel well. But
Right.
something like gluten and dairy, especially gluten, I just can't eat it. It just is never worth it for me, especially now when you can get so many gluten-free things. So food freedom is something that really like ebbs and flows. And, you know, like your relationship with food can change so much over time. The foods that you're interested in changes over time, you know, even foods that are seasonal change, your life circumstances change, you go through a stressful time and the way that you eat changes. So food freedom definitely ebbs and flows. It's a forever journey. It's not something that you ever achieve. And so oftentimes like people will kind of go back to the Whole30 to recalibrate and then continue on with their food freedom.
Very well put. You know,
Yeah, I know that was a lot.
no, it's very well put, because I think you'll be interested to know, you know, we've addressed the idea of inflammation in this podcast before. So I think many people in the audience, you know, they understand that, you know, we've harped on the idea that, look, a lot of the things that are found in the typical Western diet are detrimental to our gut. And so, you know, they generally promote overeating, and they generally promote inflammation. And so I love that, you know, the Whole30 program essentially gets people to start listening to their bodies, you know, which is not something people typically do, right? They just kind of eat whatever, and then whatever reaction happens, you know, well, they'll deal with the consequences. Maybe you can take a pill to deal with the symptoms, but you continue to eat whatever it is that's harming you or that's being detrimental or your body's really rejecting. So I love that it addresses the idea of listening to your body. Something else you said, you know, you essentially listed some things that you guys eliminate from the diet, such as dairy, spinach, legumes rather, and a couple of other things. And, you know, it's interesting to know that a lot of these things, these sugary products, you know, they make up like 50% of the calories for the average American. So we are constantly eating this stuff, you know, regardless of the damage it's doing to our gut. And so when you look at the fact that 50% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, right? It actually makes sense that we are, you know, why we're really sick. It comes as no surprise, because look at what we're eating and the fact that we're not listening to our bodies. So I really like that piece. And, you know, even some of the things you said about the reintroduction phase, you know, the idea of, hey, when you reintroduce something into your diet, if your body does not agree with it, it'll let you know. And ultimately, it's up to you to pay attention, right? You know, some people might really like a particular piece of food, but unfortunately, you know, one of the biggest reasons I find that people are sensitive to things, again, has to do with genetically modified organisms, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that so many things are GMO products, so many foods are genetically modified, that the body rejects it. It's not so much that the food itself is not digestible by the body. It's that because it's been modified, essentially it's not what God made, right? Man tinkered with it. And so the body, you know, has to give you signs. Maybe it's diarrhea, maybe it's, you know, an allergic reaction, but the body is saying, no, don't put this in me. But we continue to do it because, again, we can always take a pill and really suppress the any symptoms that are manifest. So I love that about it. And I think most people in this audience who've been following the podcast know that we have, addressed some of these things. And we've emphasized the idea of, look, you can't eat everything. You have to listen to your body. But that's wonderful. So I want to talk about you. And so as a certified coach, how long have you been doing it? How long have you been a Whole30 coach? And how do you typically practice or work with clients?
Yep. So I have been a Whole30 certified coach for a little over 2 years, about 2.5 years. And I have worked with clients in a variety of ways. So I have run 5 or 6 Whole30 groups, which I ran on Facebook. So they're private Facebook groups, and they last about 7 weeks. So we do at least a week of prep, just preparing for the Whole30 to make it, as least overwhelming as possible. And then lead through the elimination and through the reintroduction. So I run some general Whole30 groups, and then I ran 2 postpartum specific Whole30 groups. So working just with postpartum moms, which has been really cool, like for helping people kind of recover from pregnancy and birth, and kind of build up nutrient stores again. And then I worked with clients individually as well. So I have, it was about a year ago, I created the Essential Whole30 course. And so that's basically what I wish that I had when I started doing the Whole30, because I can't even tell you how many hours I spent researching like all of the rules and can I have this, can I have that, and finding recipes, and then finding recipes for reintroduction, and just like reading. There's several Whole30 books, so reading through the Whole30 books to get a really good understanding of it. So I basically took all of that and condensed it into the Essential Whole30 course, which is everything that you need, all the resources, the recipes, and all of my general information about the Whole30. And then in addition to that, I have a VIP option where I work with clients one-on-one. They take the course, so they have access to the course for 2 months, and then I work with them one-on-one as well. And so I'm there for them every single day. As it's basically like as much or as little as they want to be in contact with me. It can be like an as need basis, or like every single day, let's check in, because sometimes people want more accountability than others. So I've really liked doing it that way. I like running groups, but groups are not for everybody. Not everybody wants to participate in a group. Not everybody is on Facebook. Not everybody wants to start on the same day as everybody else. We all have different schedules, and sometimes people want to just kind of do things on their own schedule, on their own time, like work through the modules at 10 o'clock at night when they're free or whatever. So I've liked doing it that way. And doing it, the one-on-one support helps me to be able to kind of make it a little more specialized. So like my last client was pregnant. So I worked with her more on, dealing with some of the pregnancy aversions, and like the point where you just like can't touch meat, or you want a lot of carbs, and like having recently gone through that myself, I had a really good understanding of what she was, going through. So a lot of times when people have more specific concerns like that, or like, certain lifestyle background, whatever the circumstances, they like to do some of the one-on-one coaching.
All right. Now, how do you offer the Essential Whole30 course? Is it a series of videos that people watch? Are these PDF files that they can download?
Yep. So it's both. So it's currently on teachable.com. And so I created 4 videos, and they're slides, like very colorful, pretty slides that I'm pretty proud of. And then I talk through it. So it's an audio recording in the back with me explaining everything, and it's 4 modules. So there's like prep, like a general overview of the Whole30, and then a module that's like very specific about elimination and troubleshooting common issues and FAQs. Same thing for the reintroduction and for food freedom. And again, like common concerns that have come up with my clients over the years. So I addressed all of those. And then I created also a bunch of PDF resources to go with each module, like, recipe lists and a journal for logging symptoms, a journal for logging your whole elimination and how you're feeling, just to kind of like tune into your body and how your body's feeling. Because sometimes it's hard when you're not used to that to like know what to even think about. So yeah, it's great. It's like something that you can do on your own time. You could start right now. You could start, whenever you wanted, and everything is there for you. You can do it on your own time and you can access everything at once. So if you wanted to like watch all the modules at one time, you could.
Very well said. So I have a question for you. For the average American who is generally struggling with some sort of chronic disease, many a times they feel overwhelmed. You've got work, you've got kids, maybe, you've got a million other things that you're doing. How feasible is the Whole30 program, or rather, how feasible is the Essential Whole30 course? How can they fit that into their day-to-day lives or their daily schedule?
So I like to say that the Whole30 can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So, I mean, my course, it provides like a very, like all the basic things that you need to know. I didn't get into the weeds on everything because most of the time people don't have time for that. So they just want to know, like, what do I have to do? What are some basic challenges that I might get into? Give me the recipes to make, like, give me meal ideas and let me go. And so that's what the course is. It's like, I think it's perfect for busy people who don't have time to like read through all the books. Some people like to, like, if you go on Pinterest or, Google search Whole30 recipes, you will find tons of like really beautiful dishes like I used to make before I had a baby. Like, the very complex, intricate meals. And some people like, have the ability to do that. Most of my clients have very little cooking experience or don't enjoy cooking or don't spend a lot of time cooking. Some do, but for the most part, they want something more basic. So honestly, like if your meal is, a steak and some roasted broccoli, that's a Whole30 meal. It doesn't have to be anything like complex to put some seasoning on it. I started creating some recipes that I call Whole30 for people who don't cook. Okay. So they're like very simple recipes, because it can seem overwhelming if you look at these recipes online. If you get a Whole30 cookbook or something, that could seem overwhelming because it's like, man, I have to make a whole bunch of recipes I've never made before. But it doesn't have to be that way. Meat, if you have meat and vegetables on your plate, that's a Whole30 meal. And even now, like Chipotle has a couple Whole30 bowls you can get. So they're trying to make it a little more possible for you to have effortless meals when you don't have time to cook. There are other restaurants like that have some Whole30 approved meals, which is pretty cool. But it is totally possible. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you have recently been struggling with an eating disorder or are currently struggling with an eating disorder. And I wouldn't recommend it if you're going through like an incredibly stressful time, like, death of a spouse or parent or something like that, like, or even like immediately postpartum. We don't recommend in the first couple of months postpartum because you're adjusting like to a very new and stressful life phase. But for most of us, like having a normal amount of stress in our lives, it's definitely doable, especially if you have that kind of like support and the resources.
Well said. So what I found interesting with your explanation of the Whole30 is regards to calories. Yeah, I love that it doesn't emphasize calories. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that this whole calorie thing was a farce, right? They tell you that you have to eat less calories. They completely overlook the idea that, look, the body doesn't just rely on calories. You've got nutrients. The body craves nutrients. And so, I found it interesting that in 2019, the United States, people spent about $79 billion, right, in the dietary and weight loss industry, right? Yet, despite all of this, we're still getting fatter and bigger, and of course, sicker with all of that. But I love that it doesn't, pressure people into counting calories. It doesn't make you feel bad about eating, but rather it identifies the foods that really trigger your immune system to overreact in many ways. And I happen to believe, just from some of the books I've read and studies that I've followed, I happen to believe that if you reduce inflammation in the body, everything else will work well. Your metabolism will work well. The weight, will melt like butter, not margarine, butter.
It's the real stuff.
I have a crusade against, Crisco and margarine, all these things. No, so I love that. I love that it takes the pressure off of these people, where they don't have to constantly count things, but they understand the role of food. And it's about nutrition. The whole calorie thing was just to get you to buy some dietary program or weight loss program.
Right.
But in reality, they overlooked, the micronutrients, the macronutrients, amino acids. They overlooked all of that. And they told us to focus on calories. And guess what? 30 years in, we're bigger than ever, right? But no, I love that it just simplifies things into these foods will cause some sort of inflammation in you, and your body's letting you know. So listen to your body. I love that.
Right.
So now, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean that I love that about the Whole30 too. Like no tracking your body measurements, not tracking your weight or your fat percentile or anything like that. I think all of that stuff is kind of a distraction, and it distracts you from focusing on how you feel. So honestly, like I don't ever weigh myself. You can tell if your pants are fitting tighter or not. You don't need the scale to tell you that. But I think it's helped me so much to tune into my body and pay attention to like, oh, I just ate that and now I have like this weird stomach thing going on, where that used to just mystify me. Like I didn't grow up thinking about these things. Like I grew up thinking about calories, and I remember in college having like all these digestive issues, and it was just a total mystery. I had no idea what was causing it, and I really didn't understand that food could be doing that to me. I thought something was like really wrong with me.
Interesting. So tell us.
Yeah, it's definitely
No, I wanted to know a little bit more about that change in mindset, that shift in mentality from the idea that, oh, well, I just go to the gym, burn calories, I'll be fine, to look, food has power, right? Food is the fuel for the body, and the body that I want is at the mercy of the food that I eat, right? So what preceded or prompted that change in mindset? Was, I know you mentioned you had digestive issues, but tell us a little bit about what essentially made you a believer in nutrition and the power of nutrition.
Well, when I was a kid, I remember like realizing that dairy was starting to not agree with me. Like if I had milk in a meal, I would feel ill after. And gluten, I had no idea. Like nobody really even knew that much about gluten then. Like you heard people say that they couldn't have gluten, and nobody knew what that was. So in high school, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts, and I ate donuts and muffins every single day. If in my days off, I went to Dunkin' Donuts. I got donuts. And then in college, I kind of continued, and I lived in the dorm. I ate pizza every day. Like I ate a terrible diet. And my stomach was like never right. Like it just never felt well. But I didn't understand why. And I started working out when I got to college, and I would just like run, like I was always on the treadmill, running, and trying to like kind of counteract my college diet. And then when I started grad school, I think it was, well, I went through a little low fat phase too, like where I would eat all this like low fat, products that they're full of all kinds of chemicals and stuff I just didn't understand that. And then once I got to grad school, I started tracking calories more and like using an app to log everything that I ate, and just like I like to see the data and see how many calories I had left for the day. And I know I looked a little bit at like macros, but it was mostly tracking calories. And I still, worked out a lot just to kind of like stay thin. I started to realize that like my diet could be affecting my digestive issues, my body overall. I went to a naturopathic doctor, and she recommended that I cut out gluten and see what happened. And I saw immediate benefits to that. At the time, I didn't eat meat. I was a pescatarian.
Fish only,
And
right?
what's that?
That's fish only. Where you
Yes,
only
fish, yeah. And I started boxing, and that's where I met my husband. And so when I started boxing, I like my pescatarian diet just could not sustain boxing. Like at least not the boxing like 5 days a week, like hard workouts. So I was just like exhausted and drained. And so I started eating some more meat. And my diet kind of started evolving. And the Whole30 in that time, that was about around the same time, helped me to think more about like it's not just gluten and dairy, like all these other foods. I mean, if you think about the list of Whole30 of foods that you don't eat on the Whole30, they're not necessarily bad foods. So sugar and alcohol, not beneficial to relate to anybody. Like those are kind of not good food or substances. But the rest of these things, like you think about beans are not bad foods. Dairy is not necessarily bad. Grains are not necessarily bad, but they don't work for everybody.
right.
And so like that was kind of a new concept for me. Like, could legumes be bad for me? Like, I ate a lot of beans when I didn't eat meat. So, the Whole30 really helps me to reconsider how any food you eat can affect you. And it will affect you differently from somebody else, and it can affect you differently from how it affected you 2 years ago, because your body's always changing. And then also, over time, just to pay attention and kind of get way more in tune with my body. So, at first it's like, it's a pretty new concept. Like I was telling you, I had all these mysterious symptoms. I had no idea what could be causing it. And now I'm like very aware of like, I ate this and now I'm bloated. And even like realizing like dairy is making me break out, even though, it takes some time to see those effects. Like I'm starting to piece things together more. And some people find that keeping a food journal can help with that as well. Because otherwise, like how many of us are taking the time to sit down and really think about like how you're feeling, like what your skin looks like, what your energy level is like, if your brain is foggy, yeah, all of those kinds of things. So, and then you mentioned like seeing food as fuel. Boxing was a huge part of that as well. Like I mentioned, like the pescatarian diet did not fuel my lifestyle. So I just had to change my diet to be able to do what I loved to do, and not think about like the calories behind it.
Right. Step the protein game up, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I needed. I needed more protein. It didn't matter like what the calories were like, and I knew that I was working out, and it was benefiting my health.
All right. So how did you translate your personal experience to helping others? What sparked that initial interest?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been huge for my life. Like Whole30 really has changed my life in a way that I never, ever would have expected. I never had a good relationship with food. I was so obsessive about, like I mentioned, I tracked calories, I logged everything I ate. I weighed myself every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. Like that's when food is in control of you. Like I couldn't think about anything else. I was always thinking about like, well, if I eat this, like, should I skip dessert later? Or like, oh my gosh, I just like, I ate too much dessert. Like, oh, how can I counteract this? Like now I have to go work out. So like I was kind of like a slave to food, and it was very, very unhealthy. And I kind of thought that I would always be that way because so many women are. So it's just like, oh, this is just, I'm just a woman and this is how women think. Like they're always thinking about calories in, calories out, and like how do I maintain my physique? And I thought that I was kind of destined to be that way, and I had accepted it, honestly. And just having done several Whole30s over time, it's changed my relationship with food so much. And that's really one of the main goals of the Whole30. Because like I said, I started to see food as fuel. I started to think about, instead of like, well, how many calories are in this, or like, what's the fat content? I would think about like, how is this going to make me feel? How is this going to contribute to like whatever my goals are? Like if that's to, perform better at the gym, or if it's just to like feel well, or like I'm starting to feel sick, like how is this going to help my immunity, things like that. So I started to see food very differently. And then, that played a role in me just getting rid of the scale, because now I'm so in tune with my body. I don't need to weigh myself. I recognize that it's not healthy for me. I think it's not healthy for most people. And I'm much better off without it. So, yeah, over time, it's just improved. And sometimes I fall off the wagon. Like, I'll be totally honest with you. Like, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I just ate so much sugar this weekend. Like, I need to reel it back in. Sometimes I'll do sort of like 30 days or even like 2 weeks with just no sugar, just to kind of like reset things, to get rid of the cravings. And, once you eat sugar, you just want more sugar.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. But what a testimony, though. Yeah, and I think it speaks to what a lot of people are going through, men and women. It's not just women that are, finding themselves challenged with a lot of the changes that they're facing. I think you have a lot of men, a lot of teenagers, even. We really haven't been trained to listen to our bodies and learn to try and accommodate and understand some of the things that it's telling us. We really haven't been trained. These are things that even, my educational journey hasn't taught me. A lot of it had to have been self-taught by reading and learning and speaking to other people who may be in certain professions that could point me in the right direction. But that's awesome. That's awesome. So as we wrap this up, I want to give you the floor. How can we get in touch with you if we wanted to work with you? How can we work with you? Go ahead.
Great. So my website is lauraswholekitchen.com. And so I have information there about how to get in touch with me. There's a contact form. I also have blog posts about a whole bunch of different topics related to, thank you for sharing that, related to health and nutrition, and also like some parenting kind of like new mom podcasts or blog posts rather. And my Whole30 for people who don't cook recipes, which I'm working on more of those now. And then I'm also on Instagram and on Facebook under Laura's Whole Kitchen. And my email address is laura@lauraswholekitchen.com.
Very straightforward.
So, yeah, I try to make it simple. And like I mentioned earlier, I have my Essential Whole30 course, which you can find the link to on my website. And so the Whole30 course includes everything, all the resources, recipes, information that you need, concise, to set you up for success for the Whole30. And then there's also the VIP option you can choose if you want one-on-one support with me.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Ricciardi, for taking the time and joining us this afternoon for a conversation on the benefits of the Whole30 diet protocol. This is the part where I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody, essentially allowing people to ask you questions. For many of us, I'm sure this was the first time we've ever heard of the Whole30 diet and the approach. But like I said, most people in this forum, most people in this group, they have, who've been with us since we've been doing this whole Self-Care Forum podcast. We've talked about the role of food and so how a lot of the common things that we consume aren't necessarily good for us, how they cause irritations, inflammations in our gut, and ultimately our health. So I want to give everyone the floor. You have the ability to unmute yourself. If you have any questions, please, Dr. Laura Ricciardi is available for your questions.
My question is, I'm Ida. My question is,
Hello, Ida.
what foods cause inflammation? I came in kind of late on the phone call on the inflammation foods.
Well, so all of the Hi. All of the foods that we eliminate on the Whole30 have the potential to cause inflammation. It really depends. Like, they won't necessarily cause inflammation in everybody, but that's part of the goal of the Whole30 is to identify whether they cause symptoms for you. Because like Cedric was saying, a lot of symptoms, the root of these symptoms is inflammation in the body. So even things like legumes, like grains, they can irritate the gut and cause inflammation and cause an immune response.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, great questions, Sister Ida. If I may add to that, if I had to select 3 foods that are responsible for probably the bulk of the inflammation that we are dealing with in this country, I would say you're looking at sugar, you're looking at flour, and you're looking at industrial seed oils. Sugar, because it's in everything. And, we are constantly overwhelming our pancreas and its ability to produce insulin just to deal with it. Industrial seed oils, because they're just rancid, they're terrible. There are oils that are healthier. There are healthier options, don't get me wrong, but a lot of these canola oil, all of these, oils, the cheap oils and everything like that, I would say this, that they're probably more responsible for heart disease and heart attacks in this country than anything. They're just terrible things. And flour. For those who've been following us, I've gone on a crusade, all these crusades, but I get passionate about certain things and I just go off on a rant. But thank you all for sticking with me, guys. But no, they told everybody eat gluten, gluten, whole wheat, it's the best thing in the world. And all of a sudden everybody and their mom is allergic to gluten now. And so, we explain to people that, look, there's a protein called gluten, which is very hard to break down. And so when we consume all of this whole wheat, wheat, barley, rye, and oats, I guess, they have a little bit more nutrients. But the thing is, if your stomach acid isn't strong, okay, that gluten protein will not be broken down. And so for all of these people that are sensitive to gluten, what's happening is the gluten molecule travels to your intestine undigested. And as it does that, it actually damages, it damages your gut cells. And so that's what causes the leaky gut and all of the other things that come with it. So it forces you to go to the bathroom to clear this thing out of your system. So your body has to flush it. Your body has to flush it out of you. And so if I had to say, I'm sure there are many more, and Dr. Laura can share with you all a list for anybody who goes on her website and reaches out to her. But I would say, the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse are sugar, flour, and industrial seed oils, in my humble opinion. There are more, of course, but those are probably responsible for, those are probably the ones we consume the most. And they're what has led us to this healthcare crisis that we now find ourselves in.
Thank you.
Great questions.
Okay, I see a question from
Yeah.
Linda. When you say eliminate sugar, does that include fruit? No. So fruit is allowed on the Whole30. It's not recommended that you eat a ton of fruit because you don't want to still keep those sugar cravings alive. So a lot of people I found will eat like fruit with every meal or fruit as dessert or something. They kind of keep those habits going. And then at the end of the Whole30, they're like, I'm still craving sugar, like just as much as I did before. And it's because you're still feeding that craving. or what we call the sugar dragon in Whole30. So fruit is allowed, to answer your question. The sweeteners that are not allowed are like maple syrup, honey, agave, date syrup, stevia, Splenda, all those kinds of like sugar alcohols. And that kind of ends up eliminating a lot of foods on the shelf because sugar is hiding everywhere. That's one of the cool benefits of doing a Whole30 is that you start to realize what you're consuming, and you start to learn to read your ingredients lists on your labels.
That's right. And if I may add to that also, fruit generally has fiber. And, when you eat, for example, an apple, you're eating the skin, which is packed full of fiber. So, the fructose sugar that's found in the apple, because the apple comes with fiber, the fiber works to slow down the absorption of sugar into your system. So, eating an apple and eating a cookie are operate completely differently in the body, right? Whereas the cookie causes the immediate release of insulin. The apple, will cause slow release of insulin, so it doesn't overwhelm your system. So there are differences, there are advantages to eating a fruit over, a sugary snack or a sugary treat. They're not necessarily the same.
Mm-hmm. We also recommend, if you eat fruit, to pair it with protein. So for example, like having banana or apple with almond butter, so that your blood sugar doesn't kind of like spike and crash as much. You're able to better metabolize it.
Good point. Next question.
Dr. Ricciardi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm driving. So I was curious when you were speaking about some of the physiologic changes that you started to notice in your body, with certain trigger foods. Can you give like examples of like the symptoms that you noticed, or the signs that you noticed when a food was not agreeing with your body? Like, can you give us examples?
Yeah, sure. So I can tell you, that sugar makes me bloated, like makes my stomach distended. And eating sugar and some of these other foods, but mostly sugar, like eating a lot of it over time will of course make me crave sugar more, but it'll also make my skin more dull. That's something, my skin always looks much more like glowy when I'm done a Whole30. Alcohol, wine makes my feet swell. Grains. So like I mentioned, I cannot eat gluten. I never reintroduce it because it causes me, like it makes my stomach like all bubbly, and I'm just gonna share everything here. And like bloated. Oats I do okay with. I feel sometimes like a little bit bloated from oats, but that's like an every now and then kind of food for me. Corn, totally fine. Don't have any problem with corn. Rice, the 2 Whole30s ago, I reintroduced white rice and then brown rice, and white rice was okay, not amazing, but okay. Brown rice, forget it, cannot do brown rice. And brown rice, it can be much more difficult to digest. It can be more irritating to the gut, even though we think of it as healthier because it's less processed than white rice, but white rice can be easier to digest. Unfortunately, it turns to sugar in the body much more quickly. But I just tend to avoid rice typically. What else? Beans, they'll, make me a little bit gassy. I don't eat them very often, so I'm not too concerned about that. But peanut butter is a legume. I can eat peanut butter. It doesn't have any negative effect on me. I generally just avoid soy because it can affect your hormones, and it's taken me a long time to get my hormones in balance, so I'm not interested in that. Dairy, interestingly, I hadn't been able to eat soft cheeses in many years, or like any soft dairy like milk or anything like that. Hard dairy I could eat, and it wouldn't bother my stomach, but it would make me break out. Like it took me a little while to realize it was making my back break out, specifically. And it's the only thing that's done that. But like the soft dairy will make my stomach just similar to the gluten, like just bubbly and kind of gassy. But I can eat some raw sheep dairy. So raw meaning like unpasteurized, which is kind of hard to find, but I can eat that with no stomach issues. Some people find sheep dairy is easier to digest, and then goat, and then cow. So cow being like the hardest to digest. Yeah, those are kind of like the main things. But I mean, a lot of times people don't realize how well that they can feel until they really go through their diet and improve their diet. I always have people who do the Whole30 and they're like, wow, I didn't even realize like had this like energy slump in the afternoon and it's gone, or like, you know, their skin clears up, eczema, heartburn. People sometimes are able to go off medications. Like, I think we as a society don't give food enough credit. Like it really, I mean, it's what your body is made of, and it can affect everything about your well-being. Like it can affect your mood, your mentality. It can cause brain fog. I mean, it's been linked to depression and anxiety and ADHD and like a whole bunch of mental health issues that are very common in our society. And so people oftentimes will feel like they have way more energy. Their skin is clearer, I mentioned. Often, I think it's something like 90% to 95% of people lose weight on the Whole30. As I mentioned, it's not a weight loss diet, and that shouldn't be the goal, but it just does typically happen when you cut out some of these foods. Yeah, it's amazing. It can really affect you in so many ways. And we call them non-scale victories, NSVs. And there's like a whole long list of them on Whole30.com that, you know, all these things that you would never think of. Just things to pay attention to when you do a Whole30.
Do you recommend, let's say, doing
and I just saw a question here. What was that about doing a juice cleanse?
Yeah, do you recommend for people who are interested in trialing, you know, an elimination diet like this, start out with juice cleanse first to kind of like, I don't know, reset maybe the body and cleanse everything out, and then commence with like an elimination diet?
I personally would never recommend a juice cleanse, just because it's like you're getting a lot of the sugars from the fruits and vegetables without the fiber to help you metabolize it. And I think you're just kind of missing out on like a lot of the protein that you need. And I don't personally think that it's necessary. So what I typically tell people or encourage people to do when they're starting a Whole30 is to start easing into it. So people oftentimes are tempted to really just like binge before they're starting a Whole30, because they're like, I'm not going to be able to eat all this stuff once the Whole30 starts. And so they eat like, you know, they have to clean out their fridge and the freezer and eat all the ice cream and like get all the stuff out that they're not going to be able to eat. And that's very tempting. I know, I've done it. I get it. But it makes it so much harder once you start the Whole30. So like you said, like your point was to prepare your body for the Whole30. So you're not starting from like that really tough place. What I recommend is start incorporating Whole30 meals into your diet and start kind of like phasing out some of these things like sugar and alcohol, so that it's not as much of a shock to the system. And it makes it a little bit easier even mentally to not have this like sudden start date where like everything's going to change, like your whole diet has to change at one time. So that's what I recommend, to kind of ease into it.
Great question, by the way. We do have a question in the chat from Artan.
Yes, potatoes. You can eat potatoes on the Whole30. Yes, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing about the Whole30. People think of it as a low carb diet because you can't eat grains, but it's not necessarily a low carb diet because vegetables and fruits have carbs in them. And potatoes, are a very high carb vegetable, and you could eat potatoes morning, noon, and night on the Whole30 if you want. Good news, I know.
As long as your body can handle it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I still recommend sweet potatoes. I think they work better for me personally. I eat sweet potatoes in the mornings with eggs.
Well, I've got a question, and it really has to do with food culture, right? Because someone who's grown up all their lives eating a certain way, we all have it, right? We grew up with certain cultures that were handed down from our parents, our grandparents, etc. And so, I find that it requires a certain mental hurdle in order to just shift diets, right? Even though something's good for you, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll do it. And I think we find that, at least in the African American community, which is my community. I'm more familiar with that community than any other community. But there are a lot of things that we were handed down that aren't necessarily good for our health, and but we continued because it was tradition. And so, what do you see as one of the biggest mental, because it starts with the mind. You've got to be able to convince yourself that I've done this for 30, 40, 50 years, right? And, I find myself obese, diabetic, whatever, I find myself with these chronic issues. Now I've got to, even though I know it hasn't worked health-wise, I know that I need to change. But I guess what I'm asking you is, what sort of mental preparation does one need to do before doing the Whole30? Just because it's going to change, what they've done. It's going to change habits that are decades in the making.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say two things. So first, I always want people to come up with their why for doing a Whole30. And so I created a worksheet for that in my course to help you really think through your why. Because if you don't think through it, a lot of people will say, or will feel like their why is to lose weight, because they think of it as a diet, as a weight loss diet. And in my experience, weight is just never a good enough why. Weight is not enough of a motivator to keep you on a better dietary path long term. You need to start thinking about your health and excuse me, I want to be around for my grandkids, or I want to be able to chase my toddler, or I want to be able to lift heavier things, without help. I want to figure out what's been causing this eczema, things like that. Think through deeper than weight loss. List out your health concerns. I have people go to the non-scale victory checklist, which is a Whole30 PDF, and note which symptoms they're experiencing. And it starts to make you think that, it's beyond just my weight, or just this one single solitary issue. There's so many ways that my well-being could be improved. So that's the first one. Be really, really clear on your why, because that's what's going to keep you going on the days when you don't feel like eating this way anymore. Or you're bored with it, or you at a social function and they have cake or whatever your weakness is. So that's number one. And that kind of feeds into the second one, which is that one of the things that makes the Whole30 challenging for people, and to your point, from a cultural perspective, is the social pressure. That one's huge. So it's really hard to go to a family gathering where they're eating the foods that you've always really enjoyed, the foods that you love, you grew up on, you connect with your family members over these foods, and then tell them that no, I can't have that. I'm not eating that right now. You have to be able to explain why. You can't just say no, thank you, because a lot of times they'll be why? You always eat this. Are you on a diet? Blah blah blah. You have to be able to explain. I'm doing this. If sometimes we call it a self-experiment. I'm doing this little self-experiment this month. I'm not eating these foods because, you can be as specific as you want. You can say I've been having diarrhea, or I've been having like, bloating and gas. Like if you need to and you feel comfortable, be like, it's something's not making me feel well and I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Mhm.
And hopefully people won't argue with like, I'm sick and I'm trying to feel better. You never know, because sometimes people take it personally. So you don't want to say like, oh, these foods are not good for you. But just it's just about yourself. It's just about figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. It's not like anything offensive. It's just a temporary thing. I know it's challenging, and like I sometimes have Hispanic clients. My best friend is Hispanic, and she had to give up rice and beans for the Whole30, and like she had a really hard time explaining that to her mother. And then now she has realized that they don't work well for her, so now they're not even in her diet anymore. So like that's really hard. I totally understand that. But again, it's just 30 days just for your own information, just to see how it affects you.
Yeah, I think, once you tell them about the diarrhea, most people, but I would save that answer, for someone who, confronted you outright and just said, what do you think, you're better than me? No, I have diarrhea with this. You
Yeah.
too good for us.
People do ask sometimes.
You're right. I mean, look, stand your ground and don't buckle. It's your health. I once spoke to a guy, and he was telling me a little bit about his journey to better health and how he made some changes and everything. And one of the interesting things that he said, he was an African-American guy. One of the interesting things that he said was when he would go to family cookouts when he was young, he always had an odd uncle, that ate, vegetables, and he ate completely opposite to what the rest of the family ate, and he went ahead and he was thought of as the weird guy in the family. But sure enough, this man is, if I remember correctly, this man is darn near in his 50s. Okay. And that uncle's still alive. Whereas a lot of the other relatives from the cookout, they're dead. A lot of them have passed or, have poor health, but the uncle, he's still alive and in great health. And so sometimes you have to be a little different to your health. And I love that you guys emphasize the why, because you're doing this for your kids. You don't owe any man, you don't owe anybody anything, but you do owe your children and your grandchildren the ability to see you and be blessed by whatever experiences that you've accumulated throughout your life. So yeah, no, the why is really important. I love that. I love that aspect of the Whole30, and certainly what you do. All right, any other questions?
Yes.
This is
One other question. So what are your cheat foods, Dr. Ricciardi? Because you had to have some cheat foods, something that was like, I don't know, still within the rules of your dietary restrictions, but that you could look forward to. Can you give me like an example of a few of your cheat foods?
Well, so that's a very interesting point. So on the Whole30, there are no cheats, no slips for the full 30 days, because otherwise you won't have fully eliminated them from your diet, and so then you won't fully know how they affected you when you reintroduce them. I know that's not quite what you were asking, but as far as like foods that you look forward to, so like I mentioned earlier, one of the main goals of the Whole30 is to improve your relationship with food. And so on the Whole30, you're not supposed to create like desserts out of Whole30 compatible foods. You're supposed to kind of like work on breaking these habits of like treating yourself or like having something sweet after dinner, or eating to console yourself, to soothe yourself, to reward yourself, to punish yourself, like all of those things that contribute to what can be an unhealthy relationship with food. Part of the goal is to help break those habits. So we start to see food just as fuel and not, like I mentioned, as like comfort, reward, punishment, things like that. So So there are no cheats. There are no like special things on the weekend to look forward to or anything like that. I look forward to like trying a new recipe, making like a really cool new dish, something like that. But still just eating, like sticking with the Whole30 guidelines. And I have done Whole30s where I ate, I don't know if you're familiar with Lara bars. They're made of dates and nuts and like sometimes some other dried fruits. And I have done Whole30s where I ate Lara bars like every day because they're technically allowed on the Whole30. And that did not serve me. And at the end of the Whole30, I was craving sugar like never before. So I always discourage my clients from eating those kinds of like, if it's something that like you're like, oh, I can't wait to have it, like you shouldn't have it because it's just not going to do you any good. It's kind of counter to the goals of the Whole30. So if you want to get the most out of the Whole30, try to avoid anything that you think of as like a treat.
Yeah, in that case, I think food controls you because
Right.
it's the urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great question and great answer. I think somebody else had a question.
Yeah, I did. I don't necessarily, it's not a question. I was just going to say, Dr. Laura, thanks a lot because I did a health journal before, and because I had acid reflux
Mm-hmm.
and I was trying to figure out what my triggers were. So after reading and so forth, I learned that the spices and the hot sauces and all of these things that I loved, because like Dr. said that's my culture, to put hot sauce on everything, But I found out a lot of that I loved didn't serve me very well.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping a journal has really been rewarding for me. The other thing is dairy. Dairy is one of those things that I love passionately, but it does not love me back. So I just leave it alone. It gives me some side effects that I'd rather not go into. But yeah, I love that. And this Whole30 diet sounds like something I might be interested in. So I have to take a look at that because a lot of things at 73, a lot of things now don't work very well for me. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And that kind of speaks to what you were saying at the beginning, Dr. Cedric, about the goals of your podcast to empower people. And like that, it's so empowering to know what's causing these symptoms for you. Like instead of having these symptoms and being like, I don't know what the problem is. Like, I don't know what the root cause is, it's really empowering. Now, maybe sometimes I'll eat a little bit of hot sauce, but I'm not going to eat it every day. I'm not going to put it on every meal, because I know that that's not doing me any good.
Oh yeah, and I'm gonna have to. I'd hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to call on some people here, only because we've had conversations in the past where we've talked about, like I said, we've talked about gut health and some of the foods and eliminating certain foods, and so there are people who've done my program, the Genesis 7.
Right.
The first phase has to deal with eliminating inflammatory food. So I want to ask anybody on this current podcast, if you've done the Genesis 7, would you share some of your experiences with eliminating food, what you've noticed, what you've experienced, whether positive or negative? I don't want to have to call on names, but I will.
Well, I'll start off because doing that program, Dr. said, I've learned a lot of the things that doesn't work well for me. I mean, I like them, but it doesn't work well with me. And in the first phase, when I went through the elimination of things to stay away from, such as dairy and sweeteners and so forth, the reward has been very well for me. I feel better. I was very reluctant on giving up some of those things, but as I continue to practice that, I felt the reward in it, and my body feel better. Mentally, I feel better. So yeah, it's been very good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sister Gaskin. Anybody else? Jackie, Sister Jones.
Jackie, you knew he was coming.
I would have to say I'm not a good person to ask. At this point in time, I have not been doing well with it. When I was doing it, and I'm at the point where as I probably would need to start this all over again, I kind of fell off right where the pH was, and where we had to do the pH, that sort of thing, and that's where I kind of fell off at. But still doing this, some of the things that I learned on the first weeks, you know, that sort of thing, that's still helping me. And sometimes for days at a time, I've not done it. Mm-hmm. When I was doing it, I felt healthier. I felt better. Especially when I added the more water into it, I did lose weight. I've not added that weight back, which I'm happy about. So I guess I'm doing something right. Mm-hmm. Still really not exercising like I need to do, or eliminating like I need to do, that sort of thing. And yeah, not too proud of myself right now, but I still have it here, and I talked to Tony the other day, and he wants to start it with me again. So I just.
Amen. Thank you for sharing. And no, it's amazing because it's the power of essentially food, right? That's what it is, and it's right in line with what Dr. Ricciardi was saying. Yes. Right? We as a people, we've got to understand that a lot of the afflictions that we're dealing with are self-inflicted, and ultimately it comes down to ignorance, and it comes down to the fact that we just don't know, and so we are operating based on some of the things that we've just inherited, the culture, our parents or grandparents, or experiences. But at some point, we as a people, we've got to question that. We've got to say, look, this does not work, or this no longer works. With everything that's happened with foods. And again, a lot of the foods, for example, you know, if you go back to like the 1970s and 1980s, who was allergic to peanuts? You know, who do you know was allergic to peanuts? Nobody, right? It was very rare. Today, you can't bring peanut butter to school. You know, they think you brought a gun or something, you know, because you're going to get, you know, a third of the kids sick because everybody is allergic to peanuts. So it's not that peanuts became dangerous. It's more so that something happened to peanuts. You know, how are peanuts made today? Has there been any genetic modification to these organisms? The same thing with corn and a lot of other things that we're eating. So, you know, unfortunately, you know, we get into big agra, you know, certain companies, but unfortunately, if we don't pay attention to what we eat, you know, we become no different than animals. We're just being force-fed things, regardless of whether they're good for us, but as long as they taste good. But that comes with issues, right? That comes with side effects, that comes with calamities. And, you know, the fact that you can take a pill to nullify the symptoms that arise from the food you ate does not negate the fact that there's going to be long-term ramifications, right? The pill does not cure, right? It ultimately prolongs something worse. And so you go on 2 meds or 3 meds or 4 meds.
And I wanted to state too, a lot with me, Dr. Batcher, too, is not ignorance. It has to do with a lot of laziness. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. A lot of, I'm tired. You know, I was talking to Tony today before we went to worship. I said, we give so much. We need to give an hour a day with us, just an hour a day, that we should just be selfish enough to say, I'm going to take that walk. Tony's doing exercise right now. I'm going to do this sort of thing because we don't give of ourselves. And I told Tony too, a lot of it is just being lazy. Now on this Genesis 7, there's a lot of things that I did learn, and right in the beginning, I see it, but still it takes work. You know what I mean? And sometimes you just don't want to do that work. I'm still not going to take a pill. Do you know what I mean? I'd rather do the work than take a pill, but sometimes it's so much easier to take that pill than to do the work. You know, I'm going to eat what I want to eat and take this pill. And you know that that's not good to eat. But instead of, just going to take that walk that's going to make me feel better, you can't complain about the weather anymore. You know what I'm saying? Well, if it was summertime, I'd go on a walk, that sort of thing. So, Tonya, we discussed it this morning. I'm like, we just gotta to just give to ourselves, to care enough to be here for our grandkids, that sort of thing, so.
Yes. And I want to pass it on to Dr. Ricciardi. If you have anything to add, just in terms of self-care, people have to make time for themselves. They have to take time to treat themselves, if you will. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, something that I've learned just in my short time of being a new mom is that, like, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be a good caretaker for other people. Like, if I am burning the candle at both ends or whatever, not taking care of myself, I'm going to be snippy, I'm going to be short-tempered, I'm going to be impatient, I'm going to be sleep deprived, I'm going to get sick, and then that's a burden for, other people to have to pick up. So yeah, it's not, taking time from other things. It's really investing. You have to think of it as an investment. And on that note, I'm so sorry, but I have to go put my baby to sleep.
No, that's perfect.
So I can't stay on, but
That's perfect.
but thank you so much for the conversation. This is a great conversation. I loved it. So thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
And you've got people thanking you on the chat. So I want to express that.
Thank you so much.
Greatly appreciate it.
Listen to the audio version of the Self-Care Forum podcast on Spotify, Breaker, and Google Podcast.